I know I'm running behind this morning, guys. Nothing wants to cooperate on the tech side this morning. I don't know what the hell what's going on, but here we go. Good morning, everybody. Let's do a show. And good morning. So, it's Monday morning. I'm running a little behind. Sorry, Pit Danny says just Rumble. No, it should be. We should be everywhere, brother. Let me double check that because I definitely hit that button. GCM says GCM's watching on the YouTubes, and yeah, I see. There I am live on YouTube. Sure enough. So, maybe you just had a hiccup on your side there, Danny, but we are in fact live. Yep. Okay. So, sorry about that. I got distracted by the comments for a minute. Good morning, everybody. It's Monday. I had a pretty good weekend. I hope y'all had a pretty good weekend. We celebrated a birthday yesterday for my father and his brother and my godfather, all in one place, which is a rare bird, and had a fantastic 17, 18 pound standing prime rib. Oh, sweet Lord, it was good. Mario, I see Legion in the comments there, brother, you missed out. And Uncle Steve handed me a little cash because he said, he reminded me that I have not put the link up for you guys in a while. So here's the buy me a coffee link if anybody wants to throw us a couple of bones, because it does help out the channel. We are using that to build up some of the technology and capability for the channel at large. So, speaking of the channel and what we do, and I'm really glad to see that, especially that GCM is watching this morning, Georgia Constitution Media, because I'm going to be talking about some First Amendment stuff this morning. And I'm going to start with this story about the raid on a Kansas City newspaper. Now, I've actually got the story from CNN this morning, and that's going to be interesting. This is a place where you start to see some interesting things, because CNN, despite everything that's wrong with CNN, they do have a professional, industrial, vested interest, at least in theory, of maintaining the veneer of a legitimate First Amendment, right? So we've got This story from CNN Business: dozens of news organizations condemn police raid on Kansas newspaper and call for seized materials to be returned. This entire collection of words is alarming, most especially police raid on Kansas newspaper. So, GCM, Ben, you'll know this. U.S. Code 18, Section 242 refers to the suppression of civil liberties under color of law, which is to say that a person acting officially in the capacity of an agent of any government within the jurisdiction of the United States of America, using the patina of that authority in order to repress, suppress, or otherwise prevent a person from exercising their civil liberties in any capacity, is a federal crime punishable with up to and including the potential for a death sentence, depending on the severity of the result of that suppression. Right now, normally under a 242 violation, what you're looking at is some kind of fine, maybe a year, 1 to 5 years in prison. But the law actually does explicitly mention as a potential punishment, depending on the severity of the fallout from that particular abuse of rights, up to and including the death penalty. And the reason I point that out, I'd like to talk a little bit about what it means to suppress, most especially the press portion of the First Amendment. Legion says cops exist to protect their institutional power from the rabble, and that's an important, very, very correctly well stated. Cops exist to protect their institutional power, right? Which is to say that the police are interested in protecting the police. In this order, the police protect the police themselves, and then they protect the institutional authority and power of the organized government, and then they protect criminals, and then, right, you're not even on that list. And that's not me kind of chewing on it and being aggravated about how inadequate the police have become as a power institution. But that's literally the opinion of the court. We've got the Winnebago case, Gonzalez versus Castle Rock. There are several Supreme Court cases to this effect, that the police do not have a legal duty to intercede and stop crime in commission. Right? If a police officer is watching you being murdered, raped, robbed in the street, they have no legal duty to interfere and stop that crime from proceeding. The most they have is a legal duty to attempt to gather evidence and investigate the commission of that crime. Right? But there is no legal duty for a police officer to intercede on your behalf. The findings in cases like Gonzalez v. Castle Rock, in order for a case to get to the Supreme Court, it's got to start with a lawsuit somewhere. And the lawsuit in that particular case had to do with the death of several children. And the argument being that because the killer was the ex-husband against whom the wife had taken out a protective order, a restraining order, because of his history of violence. When she called for help, the police simply refused to respond. And the ex-husband ended up killing a bunch of kids, their children. And she attempted to sue the police for failing to enforce the protective order that was supposed to prevent him from doing precisely that, which was the threat that he had made previously in conjunction with already having committed a great deal of physical abuse. And the Supreme Court found that the law enforcement in that case, and generally, do not have a duty to protect. That is not something that they're legally obligated to do. And so they bear no financial responsibility for the results of their failure to intercede. Right, so anytime you see a police car that says protect and serve on it, that's a lie. Right, that any police department that's still using the language protect and serve should be up on fraud, because they're conspiring to defraud the people who read that sentence. That is a fraudulent statement. It is untrue, and my assertion to that claim is supported by Supreme Court precedents, not presidents. So when we look at this story, it reads, dozens of news organizations condemn police raid on Kansas newspaper and call for seized material to be returned. Dozens of news organizations on Sunday condemned a police raid on a Kansas newspaper at its publisher's home. Right, that right there, and its publisher's home, sending a letter to the local police department's chief urging him to immediately return all seized materials. So they broke in, and so the police broke into this newspaper, stole property, and then broke into the publisher's home to steal property. And let me clarify something real quick, because we're going to get to it in a minute, that there was in fact a warrant issued by a judge, right, for the police to do what they're doing. But a little clarification here. A warrant, which is issued illegally, cannot confer lawful authority. So if the warrant can be shown to have been ill-produced, then it becomes the case that it never had the legal authority to confer the dissolution of the Fourth Amendment privilege by the police who received that warrant. Right? Legion says, Obama judge, honestly, I don't know. I didn't get that far into, I didn't get as far as who appointed the judge into this particular round of research, Legion, but it's a fair guess. So the 4-page letter sent by the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press to Marion Police Chief Gideon Cody was signed by 34 news and press freedom organizations, including CNN, the Associated Press, New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and others. Newsroom searches and seizures are among the most intrusive actions law enforcement can take with respect to the free press and the most potentially suppressive of free speech by the press and the public, the letter said. Now, I do want to take a moment to come back here and just point out, we're talking about, you know, this letter was signed by CNN, the Associated Press, the New York Times, WAPO, LA Times. These are papers which, over the past several years, have been actively engaged in the spread of misinformation, disinformation, and calling for restrictions on the spread of misinformation and disinformation on social media and in other papers. They all got completely on board for the suppression of the New York Post story surrounding the Hunter Biden laptop. So there is definitely a flavor of disingenuousness to these particular press agencies being engaged in protesting against the mistreatment of the First Amendment. Because you'll remember that when we talk about agencies like CNN, New York Times, etc., complaining about disinformation, what they're complaining about is people going on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook and saying the jab is not perfect, right? I mean, there were some wild claims that the jab was part of a global conspiracy to sterilize everybody. Okay, that might be a bridge too far, but it's still your right to say it. But please understand that a lot of the people who had their accounts removed and deleted due to quote unquote disinformation simply said that the jab does not protect you from COVID 100%. It is still possible to catch the disease and to spread the disease even after receiving the jab. We now know that that turned out to be even more true than the people claiming it believed it to be. Most of them were arguing that it's not perfect and you still have a chance. Now we know that it's essentially the jab has a higher death rate than the disease itself, and still has a very minimal impact on your ability to transmit or contract the disease. So, but my point being, take it with a grain of salt when the AP, CNN, NYT, and WAPO are complaining about the fair treatment of the press. These agencies are in fact complicit with the government engaging in illicit censorship. But in this story, it says that based on public reporting, the search warrant that has been published online, and your public statements to the press, there appears to be no justification for the breadth and intrusiveness of the search, particularly when other investigative steps may have been available, and we are concerned that it may have violated federal law strictly limiting federal, state, and local law enforcement's ability to conduct newsroom searches, the letter said. One of the things that the First Amendment auditors often forget to mention when they're dealing with police. Go watch some of these First Amendment auditor videos, and I'll be the first to say some of the first 1A auditors are assholes. They're unnecessarily confrontational, obnoxious. GCM's videos, he does a fantastic job with the engagement. But Ben, this is something that you ought to pay attention to as well. Many of them will make the argument to the police that they have a First Amendment right. And then they'll tell the police things like, well, you don't have a right to demand my ID. Okay, clarification, and this is actually legally significant. A police officer is an American citizen. A police officer is a human being, technically. And under the First Amendment, they have the right of speech, which means they can ask you for an ID anytime they want to. They can ask you whatever they want. They can say whatever they want. What they do not have, forget about rights for a minute. What they do not have is the authority. They do not have the authority until you've committed a crime to compel you against your will to surrender your person, properties, or papers, right? Until there is a warrant related to probable cause, or at least the articulation of a reasonably articulable suspicion, to initiate a criminal detainment and then an arrest in most states. And it varies state by state. Some states say the cop can demand your ID and force you to surrender it after you've been detained. Most states, like Georgia, you have to actually be arrested before they have the authority to compel your identification. But that's an important distinction there, the difference between rights and authority. And then the other piece of it is I'll often hear auditors mention Section 242, like I was talking about a minute ago, and the suppression of rights. I have a First Amendment protected activity to film and photograph anything I can see in public, and that's true, right? And then you forget that the reason you have that right, the reason that the various circuit courts and the Supreme Courts have spoken on this is that for press gathering purposes, you have the right, the unobstructable right, to observe and report on the activities of your government officials, of your employees, of your public servants. And you have the right to record that for dissemination especially in matters of public interest related to the conduct and activity of public servants. When someone like a police officer, an agent of government, attempts to prevent you from doing that, they're not just violating your rights and thereby committing a crime under Section 242. There is an entirely separate crime which needs to be understood called prior restraint. When a government agent, or anyone for that matter, attempts to destroy outside of a private facility, right? So you're in a publicly accessible area, public space, public property, you can run that camera. If someone attempts to prevent you from gathering what amounts to evidence of activity, that is prior restraint, which is to say that is a government agent engaged in the premeditated and preemptive destruction of evidence of their conduct. Because what they're doing in that case is they are destroying what is potentially incriminating evidence against them in a probable future proceeding. And I say in a probable future proceeding because you would not be filming them and they would not be trying to stop you from filming the activity if what they were doing were perfectly innocent, justified, and legal. Now, it is also fair to say that that argument comes dangerously close to the anti-Fifth Amendment argument that if you didn't do anything wrong, you've got nothing to fear. And that's bullshit. But there's an important distinction here. That argument that you've got nothing, if you didn't do anything wrong, you've got nothing to fear, is entirely false. There are many, many cases that we can go through where you can show that an innocent person had true statements twisted in front of the jury in order to fabricate a patina of guilt, and that has ruined many lives. So rule number one when you're dealing with the cops is there's those great weed lawyers, they point at the camera and they say, shut the fuck up, shut the fuck up. Okay, those two lawyers are wrong. First, you have to say, I am invoking my Fifth Amendment rights, and then you shut the fuck up. Courts have often found and repeatedly rested on the finding that it is not enough, it is not sufficient to merely remain silent to indicate that a citizen has voluntarily invoked their Fifth Amendment rights. You need to say the words, I invoke the Fifth. Not I plead the Fifth. That's for court. I'm talking about before that. You're dealing with a police officer. I invoke the Fifth. No, no, officer. I'm not going to answer any more questions. I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right. I will speak voluntarily when I like to, and I will not answer any questions I'm not interested in answering. Right? And if the officer tells you, well, no, you're not incriminating yourself. Bullshit. Bullshit. I could say something right now that I think is entirely true, find out later I was wrong, and then get accused of lying without any evidence other than you have an absolute open gap in the space where my intent might have been. So bullshit. Fifth Amendment, you can jog on, officer. So, how did we get here? How do we get to a place where a police department in Kansas thinks it's okay to just go kick in the doors at a local newspaper, who, by the way, is investigating the police department over other matters, right? So I'll back up just a little bit. The warrant is related to some custody dispute between a couple other business owners, and the paper apparently did a public records request on one of the parties in the custody dispute who had a DUI, and that reporting is somehow on on the verge of affecting that custody battle, which, come on, if your DUI is a relevant factor in the case, then maybe it should be considered in that case. But it's also the case that the newspaper is conducting some investigations into particular officers in this police department. And I'm sure that there's going to be no way at all that anybody should be concerned that a police department being investigated has any motivation whatsoever to conduct retaliatory actions against the newspaper conducting that investigation, right? I mean, certainly if a person in a position of authority in the United States of America were to be interested in conducting an investigation into corruption against a person who openly brags about being corrupt and saying, I'll keep the $1 billion unless you fire the prosecutor, there's no precedence at all, or precedents for that matter, that could possibly inure in us an expectation that the investigation of corruption in this country is likely to result in the corrupt attacks of the institution being investigated. Common Sense Commonwealth says some of the most corrupt cops I've ever run into have been in my home state of Kansas. In fairness, that's probably a sample size situation. And Xander Mack says, I had this story lined up for tonight because it's small town corrupt local politics at its best. Yes, exactly. So, God damn, man, I started a few minutes late this morning because I had some technical issues, and it's already 8 o'clock, and there's so much more I wanted to talk about on this. Okay, so how'd we get here? The Mar-a-Lago raid is part of it. We have seen, right, all the way through the Donald Trump presidency, that corrupted law enforcement have no qualms about attacking even the sitting president of the United States. We have fostered in this country, by tolerating this madness from our police departments, we have fostered the toleration of corrupt police because there are no consequences for it. There are only profit margins. For a police officer to be corrupt, there is almost no risk, and the profit potential is gigantic. So, of course, our police are becoming more and more and more corrupt, right? The Summer of Love, in large part, the riots of the Summer of Love, for precisely that reason, that there are no consequences for police corruption, huge consequences for fighting back against the machine, and gigantic rewards for being on the take. Of course, we're seeing a rise in corruption, and the continued conduct of the riots of 2020 can easily, obviously, objectively be laid at the feet of corrupt prosecutors and police chiefs across the country. Right? So it has just been made clear that there is no disincentive against corruption in government positions in this country, and the upshot is gigantic. When you're talking about small towns like this, it's even worse, because here's the problem. You got a small town newspaper right here, right? How does anybody know that there is corruption which needs to be stamped out unless there is somebody reporting on that corruption? Right? This goes to Jordan Peterson. This goes to the thing that Jordan Peterson always says: clean your room, right? If you cannot get out and change the world until you've got your own house in order. And guys, that goes from whether or not you've done the dishes upstairs to whether or not you're involved in your local politics, right? If you're getting frustrated and having a hard time dealing with the obvious corruption that's happening in the White House and with Joe Biden, like I am, right? If you're not doing stuff locally, then you're missing a huge opportunity. I'm not saying that you're not allowed to be upset about the stuff that's going on at the top if you're not involved at the bottom, or at least moving up that way. But at the bottom, right, you can do your own dishes. You can call out your own police chiefs. You can write letters to your local newspaper, but here's the problem. Nobody's reading their local newspaper. More importantly, nobody's funding their local newspaper. Right? So I hate to say it, even if your local fish wrapper is just complete left-wing garbage, go buy yourself a copy of it today. Take a look, see what they're writing about, right? And go to one of your local meetings. There are Board of Education meetings. There are things like the Board of Commissioners meetings. There are public meetings in your community. Go see what's happening, right? If there's not a politician in that meeting essentially openly bragging about their individual corruption, I guarantee you're going to find somebody in that meeting who's, a concerned citizen who's there to complain, if not about a specific corruption issue, you'll at least find somebody who's there to complain about how something's being mishandled. A good example here in Conyers, we've had our local government has spent a huge amount of money on installing traffic circles in innocuous, tiny little four-way stops in several places around the county, and yet there's still not a traffic light at the eight-way Death Star, where the railroad tracks go through Old Town Conyers, and Green Street and Main Street run parallel, and there's an 8-way Death Star there that includes a set of train tracks, and there's still not a red light there, right? No, they put up a big philo-Afric sculpture in a completely unnecessary roundabout. It wasn't even a four-way, so it's a three-way stop over by the library, and then a four. It's psychotic. I understand a lot of the arguments for for roundabouts being safer than the intersections that most of us are familiar with here in America, the four-way stop. That's all well and good, but we're talking about two very safe intersections. It's several previously very safe intersections that are very close to one of the most dangerous intersections in the state. And all you got to do is put a fucking red light at the damn thing. Right? That's a great example of looking at your local political situation. Just hang the fucking red light. Save a few lives. It's right next to one of the local high schools. I mean, I could go on about that one forever, because that intersection has been killing teenagers since I was in high school. Right? So, anyway. Okay. I'm going to get off of that particular soapbox and wrap this up. The last thing to say on this really is, in a case like this where you've got the police raiding the press office, you're not just looking at a 242 violation of individual rights and liberties. You're looking at the active commission of prior restraint, which is the willful, premeditated, preemptive destruction of evidence likely to be valuable in the course of an investigation in the future. The thing that makes prior restraint such a big deal is by destroying the opportunity to collect the data, you have destroyed the possibility of the data having been collected. Think about that for a minute. That is a huge deal. And the law treats it like a huge deal. It's nearly the same as spoliation, where in a case that spoliation is proved, a judge will instruct a jury to consider the spoliated evidence to have been as damning as it is possible for it to have been. Right? If a murderer gets caught destroying a murder weapon, the judge will instruct the jury to assume that that piece of evidence was so damning that the murderers, that the suspect's understanding of its damning quality made him judge that the risk of getting caught destroying it was lower than the risk of it being considered in evidence. Ergo, it could not be a more proof positive guarantor of his guilt in the case. Prior restraint is very similar in nature, legally and functionally speaking, to spoliation. So y'all keep that in mind, understand that, and go watch. They're only on Rumble now. TPS report live at 9:00 tonight. I'm going to try to be there as well. I mean, I'm not going to try to be on the show. I'm going to try to be watching live and engaging in the chat. But y'all be safe out there. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow. That's the wrong button. There, I found the right button over there.